Way too much fun this morning.
Regent Bartel.
Here.
Regent Baling.
Present.
Regent Bradley.
Here.
Regent Drew.
Here.
Regent Evers.
Here.
Regent Falvo.
Here.
Regent Higgins.
Here.
Regent Rybar. Here. Regent Mennyby.
Here.
Regent Milner.
Present.
Regent Pointer.
Here.
Regent Pruitt.
Here.
Regent Roberts.
Here.
Regent Smith.
Here.
Regent Tyler.
Here.
Regent Vasquez. Regent Walsh.
Here.
Regent Whitman.
Here.
Quorum is present.
Thank you, Jane. Hey, good morning. We'd like to start out this morning by congratulating all of the winners of Tuesday's elections, those who are returning to office and those who are newly elected. We all know there's been a lot of heated debate in the recent months, but I think there's one thing we can all celebrate, and that's that we've got our TVs back. But I can tell that we'll treat the results of this election the same as they have in the past. We reach out to the elected officials from both sides of the political aisle. We will work hard to open up lines of communication with the new and the experienced lawmakers. As you recall, President Riley sent the letters to all the candidates in September and provided them background information on the UW system. With the election behind us, we'll follow up by sending a congratulatory note to all of the newly elected and newly re-elected legislators. That letter is going to be co-signed by President Riley, myself, and Regent Vice President Felbo. Regent Felbo and I plan to join President Riley in a series of face-to-face meetings with key legislators over the next month or two, and we're scheduling those meetings as we speak. Today's meeting is one of our deep dive meetings. We started this practice, as many of you know, several years ago in order to devote more time to learning about and discussing complex issues without the need to vote on them. We could say that these sessions are designed to better inform for future meetings. I think we've found these meetings over the last couple of years to be very productive, and I have every expectation that today will be the same. Our two main topics today are both timely and somewhat complicated, and both impact lives every day. This morning we're going to take a closer look at higher education and economic prosperity. In the afternoon session we'll learn more about our student veterans that are in our system. Before lunch we'll celebrate the Centennial of Cooperative Extension in Wisconsin. Right after lunch we'll also make our first ever presentation of our new Regents Award, recognizing distinguished service to the University of Wisconsin system. As you've seen and figured out, this is a full agenda, so we'll get right to it. First, a friendly reminder that we're relying on a lot of technology today. You can see we're doing some video conferencing to bring us a speaker from Georgetown University and live internet streaming to make our meeting more available to all people across the state. With all this high-tech equipment in play, our task is simple: speak into the microphone. If our chancellors or others are joining the conversation, remember to move to one of the microphones. And I've been reminded 2 or 3 times this morning that Regents make sure that you speak into the microphone. I'm looking at that fellow in the blue shirt over there from the far away in the orange tie. He's reminded us of that, but thank you. Let's get going. As I said, our first topic touches on the relationship between higher education and economic prosperity. This is an important topic, obviously, for the board and for our state. We'll focus on it again at our December meeting when we consider the UW system's new economic development plan that we've certainly been talking about, at least in some of our earlier meetings. We'll also link that plan to workforce development and the topics of enrollment, retention and graduation rates, and student demographics in Wisconsin. And we'll talk about those at not only the December meeting, February meetings, and the March meetings. These discussions will provide us with background to make an informed assessment of where we are and where we should go with our strategic framework, the growth agenda for Wisconsin, and its goal of 80,000 additional graduates beyond our normal trajectory by 2025. This morning we'll focus on workforce development and a topic we've all seen in a lot of recent news stories, Wisconsin's skills gap. President Riley wrote a column on it a couple weeks ago that I hope you've seen. We'll talk about that skills gaps, at least that's traditionally defined as the mismatch between the number of available jobs and the availability or willingness of workers with essential skills to perform those jobs. As you know, UW system institutions and other institutions of higher education are increasingly being asked by businesses, policymakers, students, and families to address the gap by producing graduates who are trained in specific disciplines to meet immediate needs in today's job market. In fact, enhancing the links between higher education and economic strength has underpinned much of our strategic planning in recent years. With these kind of concerns as a backdrop, I'll let President Riley introduce our two expert speakers. I know some of you have to leave through the day, and we certainly understand that for meetings. We do have one special announcement that Regent Walsh became a grandfather yesterday afternoon, and he has to leave for that purpose. So congratulations, Regent Walsh. President Riley.
Thank you, Regent President Smith. Good morning, everybody. Good to see you all today. Before I do introduce our speakers, I wanted to add my congratulations to those of President Smith and the board to office holders elected on Tuesday. The election put me in mind of a Lincoln story. I've been thinking about Abraham Lincoln a little more than usual because of the ads on the Spielberg movie that's about to be released on his life with Daniel Day-Lewis as President Lincoln. When Lincoln was running for the House of Representatives from Illinois, he attended a sermon delivered by his opponent in the race at that time, who was Reverend Peter Cartwright, a pretty stagey evangelist. And at a dramatic moment in the evangelist's sermonizing, Cartwright, said, "All who do not wish to go to hell will stand." And only Lincoln kept his seat. "May I inquire of you, Mr. Lincoln, where you are going?" the minister asked, glowering. "I am going to Congress," was the dry reply. So to all who are going to Congress or to the State Assembly or to the State Senate, we say congratulations. We'll be reaching out to you shortly, as President Smith said, and we look forward to working with you in the coming term. We are very fortunate this morning to have two wonderful experts on hand or on screen, as is the case with Dr. Carnevale, to share their research and insights about the current and future workforce needs at the national level as well as here in Wisconsin. I think we'll see a good broad national picture and a lot of meaty data for us to look at in our own state as well. So joining us by this teleconference and screen conference is Dr. Anthony P. Carnevale, Research Professor and Director of the Georgetown University Center on Education and Workforce. Dr. Carnevale is co-author of the report Help Wanted, Projections of Jobs and Education Requirements through 2018. You may have noticed that Tony and his research findings were cited in the New York Times earlier this week in a story that reported that record numbers of young Americans are completing high school, going to college, and finishing college. The report went on to say that this year, for the first time, a third of the nation's 25 to 29-year-olds have earned at least a bachelor's degree. At the same time, Tony noted that the demand for college graduates has been increasing about 3% a year, while the supply has increased only 1% annually, which is why the college wage premium has increased so strongly. Also joining us in person is Rebecca Kowalski, Principal Consultant for Manpower Group's Right Management Practice. Rebecca will talk to us about the projections for Wisconsin's employment needs that are included in Competitive Wisconsin's recent report, B-Bold 2, Growing Wisconsin's Talent Pool. Starting things off then in our virtual face-to-face here, please join me in welcoming Dr. Anthony Carnevale. Tony, we'll turn it over to you, and good to see you, and thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Thank you for having me. Can you hear me all right? I'm always a little suspicious of these technology hookups. Good. Let me begin my remarks with something of an apology. I'm an economist, and therefore, like all economists, I tend to sound like I know everything, but as a friend of mine tells me, you know everything except for everything else. I'm going to take a fairly material economic perspective on higher education and its economic role. That is not to say that I don't understand, as I think most would agree, that higher education serves many purposes in American society. It is crucial to the preservation of our civic culture, that is the development of a free, self-possessed people who can make decisions about the economy in the end as well as many other things, and that it serves us as well as a device that allows us to create individuals who are in the end fully able, or at least more able, to participate fully in their lifetimes. So there are broad economic purposes attached to higher education, but it's much more than that. Having said that, let me add, however, that I do think that the economic purposes of higher education, that is to help people get the skill necessary to make a living and to provide knowledge in a broader knowledge-based economy to ensure our global competitiveness, are crucial and have become more so in the higher education mission. In fact, I think they are now central, not exclusive, but central, because in American society, the one thing we require of people is that they get a job. There is little room in the American system, with notable exceptions, for people who can't support themselves. We don't care if you vote or not, frankly, and we don't care who you vote for. We do care whether or not you work, and if you don't work, the rest of us are unlikely to support you in material terms. So in the end, if higher education institutions don't provide people with the skills required to get and keep a job, I think it's pretty clear that the institutions will fail to serve their other missions, to create a democratic culture and to give individuals an opportunity to participate fully in their times, well beyond their economic roles. So having said that, let me argue, secondly, that that particular role of higher education has become much more important. I would date the most recent surge in the importance of higher education in economic terms to about 1983, after the 1980-81 recession. Prior to that time, actually in the 1970s, the economic value of college education for individuals was declining. It fell, the wage premium, so-called, for higher education, for people with higher education with college degrees over people with only high school degrees, had fallen below 40%. That is, the advantage, earnings advantage, was falling below 30% to 40%, and most economists at the time thought it would continue to fall. And then in 1983, it began to climb back up again. At first, none of us understood why, and most thought it was temporary. We thought we had created a society in the 70s where there was a danger of a revolution of rising expectations. For those of you who remember the 70s, the youth population in America was also, at that time, a troubled group in several other respects. And there was a concern that the fundamental issue would ultimately be that we'd educated or overeducated them, and we wouldn't have enough good jobs to go around. After '83, that trend turned around and continued in the other direction. That is, that's when, in retrospect, we now know that after the '80-81 recession, after we defeated inflation with a huge and deep recession, the deepest recession other than the one we're just now recovering from, that the American economy began to restructure dramatically. At the core of that restructuring was technology. And what technology did was it began to automate any repetitive task in a job, all jobs. And increasingly what it left behind for human beings to do were non-repetitive tasks. And the simultaneous shift to a service-based economy encouraged that trend even more. So in the end, in the American system, when you need higher skill levels to fill job openings where the job is more and more composed of non-repetitive tasks. In the end, that means you need deeper knowledge because you have to be flexible in the use of your knowledge, apply it differently on the job all the time, and that requires deeper knowledge. We discovered that more and more of us needed skill. Skill is the ability to use knowledge to create new knowledge or solve problems, and we needed deeper abilities among us, creativity, innovation, reasoning abilities, and so on. Also discovered at the time something that's talked about less, which is that particular jobs, people in jobs who are successful at them, in occupations who are successful at them, have values and interests that are consistent with their occupation. And we discovered that personality matters. Conscientiousness, skills that have to do with the interactions with other people, in the end, matter almost as much in the current literature at the margin as the difference between a high school and a college degree. So in the final analysis, the economy changed fundamentally. As a result, the earnings returns to college kept going up, not because college provided that knowledge, skill, ability, values, interests, and personality traits, but because in the American system, as opposed to other systems in the world, in the American system, when the job demanded more of people, we only had one institution to turn to, and that was education. And the old economy, the industrial economy, ran principally on high school educated workers and even high school dropouts. If you look back in the 70s, you'll see that in 1973, for example, more than 70% of American workers had no more than a high school degree. 65% of them were in the middle class. That is, they, in current dollars, had earnings somewhere between what we now calibrate between $35,000 and $85,000, the middle four deciles in the family income distribution. They weren't in the top 30% and they weren't in the bottom 30%. But by 2011, the share of Americans with earnings in those between $35,000 and $85,000 who were the people in the middle class who had high school or less, that had dropped below 40%. And that included lots of workers, including lots of workers in Wisconsin, by the way, in particular, who had gotten their job training on the job decades earlier and had done much of their learning on the job. So the entry-level skill requirement went up, even in manufacturing, transportation, and utilities, so that employers who used to do the job of training American workers from day one were asking for a higher skill level at entry level. And in the American system, that meant shifting from high school to what we used to call college, but since most people think college means four-year degrees, that's not really what the economy is saying. What the economy is saying is that people need some kind of formal education or training after high school. And that education or training can come in a variety of formats. If you're lucky enough, and a small share, maybe 20% of American males, and this again is especially true in Wisconsin, maybe 20% of American males can still get that training by going to work and not going to college. But that is a shrinking labor market. The entry-level requirement increasingly in manufacturing, transportation, utilities, and other blue-collar jobs is now high school plus 1 year or more. And the high school degree is virtually worthless to females. There are very few jobs for females that will pay more than $35,000 over a career per annum with high school degrees only. Women almost have to go to college if they're going to make earnings anywhere near a livable family wage or anywhere near male earnings. So there is a fundamental shift here there are 4 or 5 rules in this new game. One rule is that it's still true, although less and less true all the time, that educational attainment drives earnings. If you get a college degree, a 4-year BA, you'll earn about $1,200,000 over a 45-year career. But what is really, and that is $1.2 million more than a high school degree. But what is really striking about the change since '83 is, one, that we are underproducing college graduates, and therefore the wage premium has risen from below 40%, went all the way up to 85% since 2002. For college graduates, it's gone down to 74% over a high school degree, but it's still strong. And when you figure in the value of benefits to college graduates who tend to have more health care benefits in particular than high school workers, truth is the wage premium hasn't gone down at all. We're just paying more of our wages in benefits. It is true that overall attainment still brings higher earnings, but the most striking thing that's happened since '83 is that what you make depends on what you take. So it's true that if you're a male who goes to a for-profit school or a community college or a technical institute, and you get as little as 1 year of education or training, let's say in heating, ventilation, air conditioning for one, computers for another, anything that has to do with technical work in manufacturing, utilities, and transportation is another set. Males who get 1-year certificates can make more in those fields, can make more than about 25% of people who get BAs. And it is also true now across the country that people with AA degrees make 30% of people with AA degrees make as much as the average BA. BAs, the trend continues throughout the whole range. 44% of people with bachelor's degrees make more than people with graduate or professional degrees. So there is a shift in the relationship between education and the economy, such that the relationship is much more textured than it used to be, and depends more and more on curriculums. One other rule that's important to remember, however, is that in any particular field, and in any particular program of study, usually the higher degree makes more than the lower degree. So if you get a certificate in engineering or computers, you'll do better than a lot of college graduates, but you won't do as well as people who get an AA in that subject matter, that program of study. If you get an AA, you won't do as well as people who get a BA. If you get a BA, you won't do as well as people who get graduate degrees. And now 37% of our college graduates get graduate degrees, and generally there's a very high earnings return there within field. Although again, people with graduate degrees in education can make less than males with AAs. And technical subject matter. So it is a much more diverse system than it used to be, and the specific relationship between the field of study and the earnings return becomes more and more important as you go from a professional degree down to a 1-year certificate from a community college. That is, you better pick the right certificate. Because if you get a certificate and you don't end up working in your field, the earnings cost of that are very high. To some extent, the certificate ends up being somewhat worthless. If you get a BA in art or some other subject matter where the labor market is crowded and doesn't pay well, then there's still some possibility you'll do reasonably well. On average, BAs make $42,000 a year in the United States now, although if you get a BA in engineering, you'll make twice that. Over a 45-year career, that adds up to $2 or $3 million in differences in your earnings. There are some fields where, in fact, where graduate degrees are almost required now in order to top off earnings, like in education, psychology and social work, Less true in business and STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, but in those fields you're sort of crazy if you don't get the graduate degree. You'll do fine with the BA, but you'll do a lot better with a graduate degree. So the system is much more varied than it used to be. It has become articulated, in a sense, in its relationships with the economy. That creates problems for educators, because it then begs a huge question, which is, if we intend to make people able to be good citizens and to live fully in their time as individuals, that competes for budget with education programs that have direct economic returns. That tension's going to be with us for a long time. A couple points I want to make in closing, and that is, it looks like pretty good times for the relationship between education and the labor market. The bad news, of course, is that we've come through and are still struggling in a very grudging recovery with the greatest recession since the Great Depression. Even then, however, I might add that over that recession, if you look at the job creation in the recession, we actually created throughout the recession about 5.5 million jobs for people with bachelor's degrees or better. That is about half of what we would have created if the recession didn't occur, but we never, or at least only for a few months, did we actually go negative. Did we actually lose BA jobs in the American economy. For associate degree and sub-baccalaureate awards, we actually lost about 1.7 million of those jobs between 2007 and 2010 in the recession, but as of this month we've gotten all those jobs back, and jobs in that sector are experiencing net growth again. We are still losing. We lost almost 8 million high school jobs in the 2007-2010 recession, and we're still losing them in the recovery, although most economists suppose that they'll come back even sometime, maybe in 2014 or 2013. So there is a harsh story in the recession, but what that does is it sets up a recovery. And when you, if you think of the growth in college or post-secondary jobs the way I do as a line, in this case it's climbing, but when you take that line and you stick it in a hole, the angle of the line goes up. So we're going to get what will appear to be a resurgence of post-secondary jobs. We project in our own work between 2010 and 2020 that there will be about 53 million job openings in the American economy. Now, job openings include two things. In this case, it's 20 million new jobs in a very specific set of fields, actually. And then it's the more important piece, the 30 million. The other 30 million job openings are jobs that come because the baby boom retires. Even though it's retiring much more slowly than it used to, there's still going to be about 30 million job openings from baby boom retirement over the next decade. And a fairly substantial share of these, about 60% is one way to think of it. It's actually a little more than that. But about 60% of these jobs will require some post-secondary education or training. So we'll see something of a resurgence in that market with lots of notable exceptions. Anything that is tied to the financial industry and housing will continue to suffer a bit. Finance won't, actually. But in the end, we know that construction and any kind of building will continue to suffer until we get a complete recovery in financial markets, which people hope will come in 2016 or so, I think. That year keeps moving out all the time. But that means that civil engineers, as opposed to other engineers who will do well, civil engineers won't do well. People who are architects won't do well because of the collapse in building in America. Now, that could change if we end up with a huge infrastructure policy out of a new administration. that could change. But given the current trend, those jobs, those particular BAs and associated AA and other degrees will continue to lag. So going forward, it's a relatively optimistic scenario. I say relatively relative to the recession. And one thing the recession does is that at least some of the suffering of recession does get redeemed. And that you get a bit more climbing out of the hole, because when you're climbing out of a hole, everything looks like up. And it's going to feel like that. Wow. Even though a number of industries, most economists would say manufacturing, transportation, utilities, anything extractive except certain sectors in mining and oil, that those industries will not come back to their previous employment levels, as is the trend since about 1979. Again, policy can change that, but on the track we're on now suggests that that's the way it'll work out. One final comment, and that is this structural change, which most of us date to 1983, which is called skill-biased technology change. That is, this particular technology, largely computers in the end, not altogether, is a technology that complements skill. That is, the more skill you have, the more productivity you can get out of this flexible technology. So if you have skill and you work in a job where you continue to learn on the job and you use state-of-the-art technology, your productivity is higher and your wages are higher. So this is a technology that seems to complement skill more than it automates jobs. That is an interesting switch from the old industrial technology. So, but it looks as if, as we go forward, that structural change will continue. It looks as if it accelerated during the recession. That's why the high school jobs have fallen so precipitously, and most agree that most of those high school jobs that we lost are gone, and they're not coming back. So that more and more, by 1% or 2% every several years, the labor market will be a post-secondary labor market. It also means, as is the case since 1983, that the widening difference in incomes in America is principally caused by access to jobs that require post-secondary versus access to jobs that don't. Keeping in mind that a lot of the jobs that didn't require post-secondary, i.e. manufacturing jobs, that went to males and females, but mostly to males at the high wage end in the 1970s, 60s, and 50s, didn't really require high school. So that that loss is huge in the American system. It is a hollowing out of a high school or less middle tier of jobs in America, and it is being replaced by a middle tier of jobs in healthcare, business services, information, computers, and other industries and occupations where post-secondary is required, of some sort is required. So it looks as if that structural change will continue, and it means more and more that in the American system, access to post-secondary is really access to the middle class for more and more of us. And it really means that in a capitalist system where inequality is inherent for a variety of reasons in order to produce wealth and as a result of individual effort, talent, education levels, and so on, that education becomes, in a sense, the balance wheel between that system and our democratic impulses, which are that people that each life has value and that individuals ought to be able to participate fully in their times. In order to do so, they need post-secondary education now. That is the new trend. It's not true for every American, but it's true for most of us now, and that puts a huge burden on post-secondary education and strengthens both its economic mission as well as its mission as a cultural tool and as a servant to our basic democratic impulses. Having said all that, I didn't bring any money. And the real challenge going forward is how will we pay for all this, and that is something that all of you are going to have to work out somehow, and I wish you luck.
This is a balancing, that there can be a general recognition that education is important and we need to invest in it, but the decision makers are under a lot of pressure and there's a lot of other priorities. So what would you say to the decision makers in terms of metrics to look to justify more investment in education, or perhaps even going the other way if there's investment in other activities? Because these are people that need our assistance in that area, but we have to have a constructive dialogue about it. We have to recognize the pressure they have.
I think this is a tough question, or at least for me. It's a question where you have to ask yourself whether you are going to, and I have a luxury here, as I'm now an academic. I'm at Georgetown University. I've only been in academia for 3 years now. I used to be in the real world, and back then I had responsibilities. I have none now. So it's true. I must tell all of you who haven't been in higher education at a selective college that it's a remarkable thing. I hope it doesn't change too soon. But in the end, I think the bottom line is, because ideally what I'd like to say is that we simply ought to come up with the money. I really do believe that access to post-secondary and all that implies for the quality of K-12 education, which is another issue, has become the balance wheel between, in our system. That is, we are a democratic capitalist nation, as are most nations in the West. And education has become the balance wheel between the equality, that fuzzy thing, which I think essentially means that everybody should have a chance to develop themselves fully, and you need a job for that in America, between our democratic ideals and the capitalist system, which benefits us all enormously. So we have to have a compromise. And these two systems, there are contradictions between the two. But for 300 years, we've managed to take these contradictory characteristics of our system and make a pretty good soup out of disparate elements, and I think that's what we continue to need to do. What I would say in this case is, while ideally I'd like to say we should spend the $200 to $300 billion, it would require to make our system, bring it back to its dominance, its levels of performance in 1992. That is the last time we led the world. I don't think we have that kind of money per year. So you either stick with the purity of your ideals, which I can do here at Georgetown, or if you really want to be helpful, you have to ask what would make people better off, given resource constraints. My first, ultimately I have no easy answer for that. I think this is much like our fiscal problems. It's going to require higher taxes, higher prices to students and families, and it's going to require bringing huge efficiencies into higher education. I think the fantasy here, and I hope it's true, is that technology will save us. It's saved us in every other industry, except for, so far, healthcare and education, which are the only two industries in America that have negative productivity. And the education productivity is 3 times the negative productivity in healthcare. Nobody's fault. It's a labor-intensive industry. More students mean more cost. We've got to break that, I think, if we're going to have a democratic capitalist system that works. First, hard choice. One hopes that technology saves us. I'll leave that to Bill Gates and others who know far better than I do what the possibilities are there, and the MOOCs and all the other things that are floating around out there. I do think that in the end the system does need to be more transparent. That is, if you go to the University of Wisconsin and you're trying to become an architect, it should tell you in the catalog what's likely to happen to you when you graduate. I don't think people should, transparency is not to deny people choices, it's to give them more choices. And in any market system, and higher education is now part of the market system, always was in a way unto itself. It was a market in high test score students and colleges seeking selectivity, which has naturally made it a very stratified industry at the moment in terms of race, class, and ethnicity, because the people with the high test scores were born into the right families. But in any event, I think we need transparency. You need to tell your students, and the way you do it is you use transcript data and wage records, which are available to you from your state. You've had the wage records since, I think, 1937. Your state government and the national government has gotten them every 3 months since then. You take the transcript data, which I'm sure you've got because of the state longitudinal data systems grants that you've received from the federal government or from your own money, and you plug one into the other, and then you're able to tell students, if you go to this college and take this major, you'll make people who've done that before you have made this much money and have been employed or not, have made money that justifies the size of their investment or not, and who are, the third thing, which is less important at the BA level, but nonetheless important in general, especially below the BA level, are you working in the field in which you studied? If you decide you still want to major in the arts, that's fine with me. There does come at some point a question as to the extent to which the rest of us, that is the public, should support higher education majors that don't deliver employment and earnings, since apart from our allegiance to democracy and the right for people to develop themselves as they see fit, there is a practical consideration here in that our investments in higher education should bring some public return overall, and they do at the moment. It'll be a long time before a bachelor's degree is worth the life, that $1.2 million in additional lifetime earnings. But in the meantime, the issue is not whether most BAs, there are many AAs and certificates that may not be worth the money, but most BAs and graduate degrees are. But the issue is, where are we going to come up with the money in the short term to pay for them? The long-term return, I think, is fairly clear. So I don't have easy answers. I think in the end, transparency should help because it'll make for better transactions between the institutions and the students and the economy. I leave to political forces how they deal with that in terms of the allocation of public investment.
Thank you, and you've answered part of my question with your response regarding transparency, but we're talking about in our society, you're correct, jobs are required, but they're not mandated. And also in our society, they're not directed. The impetus for deciding on a particular career must be tailored to attract young people, and they must have an awareness. Now, the transparency that you talk about is the transparency at the entrance level. But what we're talking about now is a complete restructuring or a reapproach to many times first-generation families where their fathers, grandfathers, and so forth relied on the old relied on the old industry model, where high school diploma would get you where you wanted to be, to a new model. And do you have any suggestions about how we can approach students prior to the ultimate decision, but getting them to a point where they understand at a younger level that the investment in a post-high school education is going to really make a difference in their lives when it runs counter to what the family has experienced over several generations? If
there's one state in the union where that's going to be difficult, it's yours. You are the premier manufacturing state in America. The manufacturing you do is the highest value-added, highest productivity manufacturing in America. You're not the South, where a lot of the manufacturing is old line and is going to have trouble. So it is still true in Wisconsin that for, again, a minority of high school educated males can make their way, although that door is closing because employers are demanding higher skill at entry level in manufacturing, transportation, and utilities. If I were a young high school male, the temptation is great, which is why high school males don't go to college, is because they can earn money without doing it. Women do because there's no other way out for them. I think there's a dual challenge. One is, and the first part is easy, you want to drum up demand for college. I don't think you'll have a hard time doing that. The more difficult question is how you're going to pay for it once you drum it up. The supply question, the cost question is the tough one. It's not hard to get people, especially if you give them money, to get them to do something. But I do think that one of the things that you can do, and one of the things I would argue for, is that in high school, since people are about to make lifetime commitments that involve another level of education, that they should be given some sort of training in the financing of that education. I'd say it's a course you ought to take your junior year. Essentially, upper middle class families don't need the course. They have their mom and dad. But a lot of the people need to understand that they're about to take out loans and that it's a one-and-done deal. If you blow the loan, you'll never get another one. So that, and to give them some sense of what career tracks are open and what they pay. In college, I would argue the same thing. I think your catalog should have in it what the track history is in economic terms of different majors and course structures. I don't think people should be prohibited from choosing among those courses unless you get to the point where the courses quite clearly really offer no value added. Then you have to decide if they offer value added in other terms. That's a tougher sale, I understand that, to a legislator or to a family. Nonetheless, I think we've come to the point where we now are relying on post-secondary education and training as a mass institution that will include good 60, 65, 70% of all American youth, not to mention those who need to go back after they're in the labor market, but so that we've got to think of it more as an economic institution. And I think the students and the legislators and everybody else, including the citizens, have a right to know what the prospectus looks like for different courses, majors, institutions, and the like.
Question? Regent True.
In the briefing documents, it says there's going to be, I think it was your study, 1.9 million jobs in Wisconsin by 2018 that will require some post-secondary training. And it looks like over half of those will require something less than a bachelor's degree. I think it's about 1.1 million of those will require less than a bachelor's degree. And I'd be interested in your comments on the, I mean, obviously we're higher education, four-year degree, that's our mission. But I'd be interested in your take on, there's kind of been a prevailing mindset that there's only the one way to win, which is to go and do a traditional four-year bachelor's degree, and that's what we should encourage all children to do, all high school students to do, that's the way to succeed. Whereas I think the middle skills jobs that really, the Wisconsin economy depends greatly on the middle skills jobs. How can we sort of, kind of encourage that as another way to win, but also how does higher ed fit into that in terms of moving people from those middle schools or middle skills in pathways to where they can then move into higher ed, and how can we be more effective at helping that?
There is, the United States has always been very good at higher ed. That is, we're very good at the top. We do good graduate and BA production, and the students, I think the evidence is quite clear. The quality is very high, and it's getting higher. And the system sorts much better than it used to. So if you're a kid from Texas with a high SAT score, the odds that you might go to the University of Wisconsin are much higher now than they were 30 years ago. That is, the system is collecting the high test score students who tend to be high income and white, increasingly in the top 400 or 500 colleges in America. We've got huge stratification, very articulate stratification in the system now. All the pretty much African American, Hispanics, working class and low income kids are in 2-year schools or the least selective 4-year schools, and this does make a difference. That is, they get less money spent on them, for one thing. They have less chance of graduating, given even when their test scores are equal. If you go to a top-tier school, your chance of graduating is 90%. The same kid at a bottom-tier 4-year college has a 65% chance of graduating. So, you know, there is and at a community college, it's below that. It's around more towards 40. And that's for a 2-year degree. So I think that's one issue, which is we've got a lot of quality at the top. Well, we're not so good in the middle. And in terms of serving students at the bottom, we're AWOL. We don't do that. That is largely in the 2-year system, and the alternative, the sub-baccalaureate system, serves working class, lower income kids. It doesn't serve poor kids. So in the end, I think we're talking about a different game. Back in the 50s and 60s and 70s, the employer took care of the middle skill. In a place like Wisconsin, it was very clear. You a strong back and a good work ethic. You show up, they hire you because your Uncle Louie worked there. And then 30 years later, you're making $85,000 a year with overtime, and you got a place on the lake. That's less and less there. So we never built the middle skills systems. The Europeans always looked down their noses at us because they had their apprenticeship apparatus, and in their view, we had nothing. But what we had were our employers. But employers are not reducing training. That's not what's going on. What they're doing is they've raised the entry-level hiring requirement. They train more than they used to now. But they want people coming in with some post-secondary more and more. So that sector needs to be, the notion that we take the money from the top and give it to the middle and all that is a non-starter politically, and it will harm quality as it's already doing in the top tier 200 or 300 institutions in America. So we got to find a way to improve quality in the middle. I think there are lots of ideas. One that I heard just a day or so ago that I kind of like is it needs to be a K-14 system effectively. That's what a lot of these ideas are about, is that the connection between high school and college needs to be made now, because otherwise high school is sort of meaningless for a lot of people, except for upper middle class kids where their horizon is not high school, it's college or graduate school. For other kids, the horizon needs to be 14, not 12. And through 14, we've got time to get them to a point where realistically you've made them college or career ready. The notion that we make people college and career ready maybe out of high school, career ready, statistically that's a non-starter. You can't make somebody career ready out of high school. If you did, it's the kids in the top 10% of the class who would then have enough skill to take low-wage jobs and learn on the job, and that's not what we're talking about. So college and career ready requires something better than a K-12 system. So I think in the end, the focus on quality in that middle tier of jobs and the training systems, including building relationships with employers, and it may be given the history and the traditions in the American system that we're talking about two systems. The key there would be, because all systems that begin in high school, say deliver career and technical education in high school, that is a political non-starter because of tracking, unless there's a connection to college. Which pushes me towards K-14 by whatever kind of name you want to call it, whether you call it career and technical education, programs of study that link high schools and 2-year schools, and in the system where there is always another on-ramp for education. There can be no dead ends. That's tricky. How do you turn an HVAC certificate into something that'll move you towards an AA degree, which then moves you towards a BA degree? I think it doesn't take a lot of imagination to figure that out. If you're in HVAC, the kinds of things you need to learn about compression, pipe sizes, and a whole series of things, you've got a pretty good technical education that should be able to move you towards an AA. An AA should move you towards a BA, and so on and so on and so on. So I think, and in a sense, we look at the European systems, that's what they're doing. They're connecting their apprenticeship system to their four-year schools. So there is there are a lot of ideas, and my guess is they need to be, what they are then in the end, though, is more and better education. And very quickly what you run into is that we have the most expensive and least productive education system in the world. And there are lots of excuses for that, but I think when you start there, we've come to a point where two critical services in the American economy need to be rationalized, to use the terms that economists use. One is healthcare, the other one's education. And we need to do that without losing the cultural and individual purposes that education serves beyond dollars and cents and making a buck. Although in this culture, making a buck is a very crucial thing to a quality life. Thank you very much. I wish you luck. I admire your system.
Did he have a visual on it?
Yes.
I thought it was education in general. Listen, I wrote it down too. Yeah, exactly. Especially something.
How does it get to that? Yeah, don't watch that clock.
Don't watch that clock.
Yeah, don't watch that. We want to welcome.
Very long time.
Okay, we'll want to welcome Rebecca Kowalski. Remember, she's the consultant for Manpower Group's management practice, and she's talking about projections for Wisconsin employment, and specifically about the recent report on People 2. Ms. Kowalski, thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here today. You know, it's really interesting. When I got this call from David, and in fact, even when we started the People 2 journey, something interesting was happening, because for the last year, I had had a lot of conversations with government. I had had calls with people from Mexico, and calls with people from Singapore, and calls with people from Japan, all trying to crack the same nut, basically, which is, we have a problem. Some people framed it as a problem, some people framed it as an opportunity. And the folks that framed it as a problem said, you know, we have a major talent mismatch. We have a gap, and it's starting to affect us from an economic perspective. Prosperity engine is starting to dial down because we can't get consistent access to talent. So we have multinational corporations largely that have come here to be able to access talent. Now they're looking at moving out because they can't count on a consistent pipeline being available. Even with costs going up, Even if they have the ability to pay it, we just can't get the pipeline full of enough talent. And we had other countries that said, we have an opportunity here. If there is such a thing as a talent mismatch taking place around the world, could we not, with the right kinds of interventions and bridging, some sort of harmonious relationship between education, government, and employers, start to create a pipeline of talent that would make us attractive around the globe and put us on the map as the place to go to for this kind of work or this kind of industry. And so that was a very interesting conversation. It's the right conversation. It's the conversation that's taking place around the world, at World Economic Forum events, for instance. It's a conversation that's happening at local level governments, and it is the right time to be thinking about, yes, we're at an inflection point, we need to start doing something differently. So BBOLD 2, for those of you who haven't really had an opportunity to look at it, was a continuation of BBOLD 1. And BBOLD 1 was really looking at, okay, what needs to be done in Wisconsin to make it a top 10 state and drive economic prosperity? BBOLD 2 said there is a human dimension to this, there's a talent dimension to this. We need to ensure that we have a continuous pipeline of rightly skilled talent to power that prosperity engine. So when David called and said, okay, after BBOLD 2, one of the logical extensions is to say, well, what role does every part of that ecosystem have to play in this? You've got individuals, you've got employers, you've got education, and of course you have government. And what we're keenly interested in understanding is, how might we all work together, and what role does higher education have in ensuring that continuous pipeline of talent that drives economic prosperity? So there's a backdrop here, and I think this is probably a map or a graph that most of you have seen in one way, shape, or form, which is the backdrop is complex. We've got an aging population in much of the world. When you look at how that is playing out in terms of retirement statistics, you see some frightening numbers. And by the way, where those retirees are coming from are from very in-demand skills. Think about the fact that the average welder in the U.S. is 56 right now, right? And is in a position essentially to retire early if they want to. You have healthcare workers. In Wisconsin specifically, you have 77,500 that will be able to retire within 9 years. So you've got something playing out globally. In the U.S., you have something playing out, and in Wisconsin specifically, you've got an aging workforce backdrop that's causing retirement out of skill sets that are already in scarce supply. So the question that you would logically ask is, how will we replace those, or how do we get people to stay longer? How do we move people from roles in which they may currently be that are dropping out of demand into roles that will be in demand? So this is a complex backdrop against which you have to be thinking about. Specifically, as we look at the skills that we considered for BBOLD 2, most of these require some sort of BA or BA plus in order to play. That's the table stakes in order to, get to the job, get to the role. What was very interesting to us was that employers made this linkage pretty early on, which is if Wisconsin cannot, in a continuous and sustainable way, keep stocking the trout pond, so to speak, with the talent that we need, we're going to be in big, big trouble. We might have been attracted to shovel-ready sites, tax incentives, etc., but if you don't have the talent, we can't play. And you're already seeing that some companies have pulled out or have been making noises about pulling out on the talent dimension. So it's one thing to have a business-friendly environment, and it's another thing to create an environment in which you're creating the kind of talent that you need. Incidentally, I work with, as a little bit of background, I work with a lot of global Fortune 500 companies. And one of the first questions they ask me when I sit down with them is, where can I go to find a sustainable pool and a large pool of this kind of talent. It's often software developers, architects, systems engineers, sometimes it's skilled trades, sometimes it's healthcare workers, and they have become very creative in asking the question. It used to be, what's the magical place to go, right? And 5 years ago everyone said India. And guess what? That hasn't turned out for some companies quite the way they thought it should turn out. Other companies have said, well, I'm interested in who's doing innovation really well. What countries, what states are really starting to invest in the root cause of the problem? Now, that was a conversation I was interested in having. That goes beyond looking at supply and demand, and it goes into understanding what marketplaces have really started to connect those pieces of the ecosystem, the individual, the employer, the educator, and government, to solve a systemic issue and start to build the pipeline of talent, taking a long view, taking a 5-year view, taking a 10-year view, not just trying to attract employers based on what they have now. So when we had the People 2 conversation, we were able to say, this is good. You want to be a top 10 state in terms of building that sustainable pipeline of talent. It takes time to do it. But the good news is that employers have already started to engage with the thinking of, I need long-term prosperity for my organization. I'm interested in people that are making, markets that are making long-term plays, as opposed to telling me right now, if you come here, I can give you the lowest cost. So the challenge for the rest of the players in the ecosystem is to adopt the same mindset, which is building sustainable pipelines of talent, which in turn drives sustainable wealth, right, and socioeconomic stability. Compounding this backdrop of aging demographic, people aging out of entire industries, creating a significant numbers issue, we also have this talent mismatch. And I believe the piece that Tony presented earlier about 25% of unemployment can be attributed to the talent mismatch, that sounds about right to us. We've been tracking this for 6 years around the globe with employers saying we can't find the right talent. And if you were to look at, this is very hard to see, I don't know if it's showing up well over here, but in fact in the U.S. we're at 49% of employers saying we can't find the talent that we need, right? Significant risk, significant opportunity. In Wisconsin, by Wisconsin's own reports, we're finding 17.5% of small companies, 31% of large companies. Only that small number says we've got world-class innovation talent. Remember what I said about what employers are looking for. Who's investing in innovation? Who's investing in the long term? What university systems are creating systemic thinkers and agile problem solvers? That's a relatively low number. And by the study that we did, when we looked at what we're able to fill in Wisconsin, what we're leaving unfilled, 1 in 10 jobs are going unfilled. This diagram has been around in our organization for several years, and what it's simply designed to say is we do have a demographic shift that's causing a numbers problem. But if you just looked at right now, you have enough bodies. We have, 6 billion and some change people on the face of the planet. But we also have incredibly high levels of unemployment and underemployment. And if you think about the U.S., what we're talking about when we talk about a talent mismatch is we have too much of the low-skilled or wrongly skilled talent and too little of that kind of innovative problem solver, typically STEM skill-oriented talent that we need. And when you think about the flow-down impact that that has on society in terms of unemployment, in terms of unemployment claims, in terms of youth unemployment, you start to see that there's significant risk. And the question becomes, how could we get these two shapes to more closely align? And what role does everybody play in it? We've got a lot of open jobs in the U.S. Some people call it the jobs paradox, some people call it the jobs conundrum. We call it a talent mismatch. 3.1 million open jobs. And how many unemployed? It's been floating between 13 and 16 million for the last 3 years. That tells a story. And where the talent is required, again, and Tony said this earlier, this is post-high school degrees. We need higher skilled talent. We need more of it, and we need it very, very quickly, or we're going to have a real crisis on our hands. We have consistently been reporting for the last year 30,000 open jobs in Wisconsin, and yet we have a significant number of people that are underemployed and unemployed. So this provides a huge opportunity for the ecosystem to act differently and act together. And Beeble, too, provided some good recommendations around that. But what I want to talk about today is the role that education can play in that, and what kind of shifts this whole backdrop of complexity are going to require, both in mindset and culture and adaptability of the system. Although there are, what I can tell you in terms of a short story, there are so many things that the UW is doing right now, and it's going to be a function of more and faster as opposed to radically different. So that's a great story to tell, and I can tell you, unfortunately, I can't have quite that happy of a conversation with everybody I talk to on a day-to-day basis. Oh, I didn't realize these were not on the overhead. Sorry about that, everyone. So, in Beeble 2, we talked a lot about how you would future-proof the state of Wisconsin. I mentioned that I've been having conversations with a lot of governments, like Japan, like Singapore, like Mexico. And everyone that has that conversation is thinking about, how could I see the future? What do I need to do differently that's going to set me in good stead for the next 10 years? And we found that there was an inherent need to look differently at skills. Right now, around the world, most economies function around an occupation-based taxonomy, right? Very specific. Some of them are coded, level 1, level 2, the ONET catalog works this way, the BLS works this way. And it's very much a backward look, and it's very precise. Remember one conversation I had with a group of folks in Singapore, and then I had a similar conversation in Mexico. That inherently locks you in and does not create the kind of flexibility and adaptability you need, because how can you project off of an occupation that is there today and may not be there tomorrow? Is there a different and more contemporary way that you could look at skills that would take in more territory and create more flexibility? The way we talked about it with Singapore, and I just offer this as an example because it's current and it's interesting, was could you create a pipeline of talent that is oriented around many different kinds of skills that allow them to slide across multiple industries and allow them upward mobility inside of that, what we call a skills cluster? Would that not create the kind of agility and overall health for an economy on a long-term basis as opposed to locking down into one specific asset? So when we went to answer the question of how can we see into the future and determine what skills will be in demand 5 and 10 years from now, we said to do that with a degree of total precision around the current occupation taxonomy doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to us. What does seem to make sense is taking a more holistic approach and saying, what kind of skills clusters drive your key industries? What will the demand for those look like over the next 5 to 10 years? And what will the supply look like? And that led to an interesting conversation because we were able to then see where the opportunities were and where the leaks were in the current system. We could also then say, well, what's really required to build that sustainable pipeline of talent? One key thing there would be to create skilled talent that can flexibly move across occupations inside of a skills cluster. And it would meet the burden of needing to future-proof, if you will, so that you're not so specific and reactive. We hear this a lot, and we heard it in our due diligence for the Beeble 2 project, that employers would ask for a very specific set of skills. And educators would marshal their resources, and they would create programs, and they would educate to that very specific blueprint. And 2 years from that point, the need had shifted. And so do you make those employees redundant? Do you build on those skills? Or do you just say, oh, goodness, it wasn't quite what I was looking for. It doesn't match what I need. How could you create flexibility from the beginning? And one thing I would say to you, because it's probably going through your minds, it's not just that the education system needs to think about something like skills clusters versus occupations and how to create that kind of broad skill set within the student population, but that employers have to ante up as well. Because for a very long time, and partly exacerbated by this talent mismatch, they've said, well, goodness, with so many people unemployed, I can afford to be incredibly specific about the skills that I need. And what's happened is that's actually exacerbated the talent mismatch, of course, because they didn't really need to be that specific. If you guys were looking at the Wall Street Journal, goodness, it must have been 3 or 4 months ago, there was a great piece written by an HR executive who said, I applied to my own company, and because of how specific and rigid the job description read, I couldn't even get an interview. And the whole piece was about we've become too specific, and what we really meant as employers when we said specific was flexible and able to do very specific things, but we would need them to move. And so there's always going to be a tension that has to be managed in the conversation between education and employers, which is you say you want this, but let's talk about what you really need. So let's follow this down so that we can talk about what a skill cluster really is, what's inside of it. So the premise from a Manpower Group perspective is mobility is the new normal. Mobility across occupations, mobility across industries, and the idea is, to be able to help people be agile enough to, again, move across occupations, move across industries, but always keep that pipeline of talent fresh and get to not just the sustainable piece, but sustainable levels of wealth and prosperity inside the employment force. So basically, you're creating, some people would think of it as a job family, but even that's a little specific. This is a way to group multiple occupations that share the same skills and share the same educational profile. So as many of you know, if you are or have been involved in the software development fields, that there are probably 3 or 4 educational paths you can take in order to become a software developer. You might take computer science, you might take math, you might take some other kind of technology degree at a 2-year institution and build up certifications. There are lots of different paths, but there are also multiple occupations inside of that family of software development. However, everybody has to take the same 2, 3, or 4 roads to get the table stakes degree that they need to practice in that space. So what we had to do was really map out what are the occupations inside of a skills cluster, what's the educational profile that gets there. We had to be specific so that we could track data, because remember, we were building towards being able to project what is needed over the next 10 years, but it also had to be general enough that it was taking in multiple jobs or occupations. So the way I would explain this to a client is, when I'm looking externally at a population, I need to describe the job in such a way I can find the data. If you tell me you're looking for 500 people that live within a block of Starbucks and speak Japanese, that's going to be much harder to find because there's no data to support it. You have to be able to trace it to data set. And those are just really technical things that basically help you understand how we build it up and how we track the data that supports the supply and demand projection. But these last 2 things are really important. This is about defining a skills cluster in a way that represents a foundation on which an individual could build, around which an education system could plan curriculum to be able to say, in order to continue to build proficiency in the skills cluster, you would need to take this or you'd need to take this, so that it would be stackable in some way. The other piece is that skills clusters differ in impact. So you are looking for predominantly in the skills clusters we did in Wisconsin, those kind of innovator and entrepreneurial skill sets. that are critical to the 6 industries that make up 56% or so of Wisconsin's GDP. But those skill sets have to be in place. Those skills clusters have to be in place in some number, in some force, in order to drive the mass employment that's dependent on them. So there are also skills clusters that are larger in mass, that are critical to an economy. But if you don't have the tip of the spear skills, those that represent entrepreneurialism and innovation, you won't have the rest of those, because these skills here are dependent on these skills over here. You must have both in order to have a healthy economy. Now, B-Bold 2 did not look at the math skills. So it didn't look at, for instance, factory floor personnel outside of the metal manufacturing skills cluster. And obviously there are masses under that. It did not look at the tourism industry and all the service personnel inside of that. But what we would say is you can expect that those masses to fall away if you don't have the skills that will support the 6 critical industries that drive GDP in Wisconsin. So we're always looking for what are the skills clusters that are going to really drive economic performance. What we would say to our executive committee and advisory board, we weren't picking winners or losers. We were picking the skills clusters that are most connected to driving GDP in those industries. And that's something you really have to understand very well in order to ascertain, do we have the supply of talent that's going to drive those industries, or are we at risk from an economic health perspective? So these are the skills clusters that we looked at, and these are the industries that we looked at. So we identified 6, the B-Bold 2 Executive Committee identified 6 in conjunction with Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation. And you then have to do the work of saying, so what are the skills clusters that really are needed to drive success in all of these? And you probably are not surprised by these results, because it should be clear that when you look at these, you can't really have a healthy and thriving economy without them. Systems and network software development, we live in an app world, an increasingly connected world. We're moving into an Internet of Things world. And so these folks that drive things like business analytics, that drive communications and technical support are critical across all industries. Our supply and demand projections, by the way, only included these 6 industries. If you included all industries in Wisconsin, you'd be looking at an even bigger population. Accounting and financial analysis, again, kind of speaks for itself, cutting across all of those industries. Nursing and health-related professions is a curious one for us, because it doesn't map across all of these nicely. However, remember, Wisconsin is an aging demographic. They expect to have access to excellent quality health care. And so this population is really important to understand. Mechanical engineering cuts across 4 of the 5 industry clusters, and then metal manufacturing cuts across 4 as well. Now, you're probably also noticing that these have a common thread. All of them, to some degree, have a STEM background, a science, technology, engineering, mathematics background. There has to be some level of proficiency demonstrated in those skills. People sometimes, if they don't know much about it, are a little surprised about that in terms of metal manufacturing, but as I'm sure all of you know, that requires a pretty strong mathematical and analytical problem-solving capability to do this well, particularly since there's a skills evolution being experienced here in things like welding. So that's how we chose the skills clusters that we would look at, that these are really the tip of the spear for Wisconsin. They're not the only ones that are important. When we talked to DWD Secretary Reggie Newsom, he really liked the skills cluster approach, and he'd like to look at expanding that over time to look at some of the other industry drivers and understand that better. But for right now, we started with these 5 to say this is where you're most at risk in terms of these driver industries. So the supply-demand forecast that we did looked at 10 years. Now, you might recall back to an earlier slide, we have a shortfall today. Across these 5 skills clusters, we currently can't fill 1 in 10 jobs. So even with unemployment at the levels that it's at, with the population that we have, 1 in 10 jobs in these industry sectors, in these skills clusters, goes unfilled. And by the way, for all of the employers that we talked to in Wisconsin over the course of the project and just in the normal course of doing business, they are feeling this. They are feeling it in a pretty mighty way. I sat on a plane next to someone who said, you know, I only have 200 programmers in my organization, but I'm having to look at other countries. I can't find what I'm looking for in Wisconsin. I can't find what I'm looking for in the U.S. So I'm recruiting internationally and trying to virtualize as much work as I possibly can. Another client that I'm working with said to me, you know, we have currently the stable talent that we need, but a huge percentage of that talent is over 50. And I have no good idea how I'm going to replace those people, how I'm going to replace their domain knowledge. I have relationships with universities, but you know, I have a hard time helping them understand the connection, you know, between what those students are doing and what we need from them and getting them connected into the jobs. There's just not a sufficient supply. So people are feeling the pain individually and as a collective. And as you can see, it's really only set to go up. So each of these bars represents 5 years, right? So this is 2016 and this is 2021. If nothing changes, this is what happens. You know, this represents a fairly modest demand, I'd like to point out. So with the exception of healthcare, which shows a 3.75% demand assumption over that period of time, annualized. The others are projected at 4%, which is under where Wisconsin has been performing. It's under where Wisconsin is projected to perform. I believe we're projected to perform at 4.6%, the IMF projects, and 5.3% in the U.S. So we used a very modest growth rate. So you can imagine if we hit those wonderful numbers, we'd all like to see that happen. These spikes would be higher. And even if it was only 2%, it would just bring the bars down lower, but we still have a significant gap. Believe me when I say employers are looking at that and they're saying, do I stay? Do I go? One client I'm talking to says, I think I'm going to opportunistically reduce. I just don't see the talent coming in Wisconsin, so I think what I'm going to do is as people retire, I'm going to move that work somewhere else in the world because I don't think I can get the talent in Wisconsin. That hurts to hear. And I can tell them the story of what Beebold 2 set out to accomplish, what the UW is doing, that about 50% of the degrees being produced are in the STEM skills. I think they don't know, incidentally. It's amazing how much of a communication disconnect there really is across the ecosystem in terms of employers saying what they need, in terms of educators saying in language that business can understand, here's what we're producing and here's where we really need you to stand up to a call of action, to individuals understanding where the jobs are and signing themselves up for what's really in demand over time. So there's a significant disconnect driving these numbers. And some of it is really down to this individual choice component. And Tom talked about that actually just moments ago when he said, do we give people early enough on transparency to what will be in demand? So do we help them understand that the degree that they're signing up for has this kind of job probability associated with it? Tony Evers, I'm going to pick on you for a moment because you were on the advisory board of Beebold too. But you brought this up in a really salient way to the group, which is you've got to give people visibility in middle school, in grade school, and you have to get to the influencers, the parents, which is why one of the recommendations in Beebold 2 was you are going to have to make this kind of supply and demand information transparent across the entire ecosystem. Educators have to know. The system has to know, and down to the individual educator. Individuals have to know. Parents have to understand. Employers have to get better at expressing demand and understanding that sometimes what they want isn't necessarily what they need. And I'll tell you a little story about that in a moment. But this is a significant problem. This is what we're all trying to solve, and I can tell you that across the U.S. and around the world, markets are facing this in greater or lesser degrees. Whatever interventions are taken, it's going to have a 2 to 5 year lag, right? So if you could fix everything today, it's still going to take 2 years to produce that person with the associate's degree and 4 years to produce the college grad, and it takes 18 years to develop an 18-year-old. Last I checked. Maybe the science labs here are figuring out a way to accelerate that. So the good news is that it's become a recognized problem and folks are doing something about it. The question that David posed to me was, what implications does this picture have against that backdrop of complexity we talked about for higher education? So some thoughts. First of all, the UW system's already taken some critically important steps that put you ahead of other states. So when I think about the critical strides that you've made, first of all, just being very aware of the problem and looking at how to align curriculum with demand, with employer demand, that's a significant step. And you know what, folks from the Badger State that have the contemporary skills have always been in demand with employers. It's a highly regarded set of institutions. The signing up to the Common Core, signing up to CCA, finding ways to essentially market the success of the UW system, huge steps. The creation of the flexible degree, the continuation and expansion of that to tap into people that may be place-bound or require more flexibility, those are hugely significant steps. So I want to first start with acknowledging how the changes that you are contemplating and the ones that you've already taken action on are the right ones. And like I mentioned before, it's going to be more and faster in order to really turn the curve. A couple of other things I would share. Aligning curriculum requirement with industry insights and getting an early read on those industry insights, I think is hugely important. So I work with a lot of companies that are in high-tech industries. And one of the things that I hear most about recent college grads is they don't innovate well and they don't problem solve well. Particularly in the IT discipline, I had one person say, look, in computer science, it used to be that you got experience with hardware and virtualization of a problem. Now the focus is on operating a software. And my response is, well, is that what you told the educational system that you wanted? Because if you told them that you wanted that, then that's what they did. You're going to have to get used to the tension with the educational system saying, you say you want that, it's going to be an and strategy. What you have to understand you're sacrificing in order to have that is those core skills of innovation and problem solving and out-of-the-box thinking and really understanding a problem from the ground up and how to deal with it. It was interesting because I actually had this conversation on Tuesday, and the person that I was talking to is in charge of engineering and particularly the test function of this organization. And he said, oh my gosh, I never thought about that. We always just tell them what we want, but we say, I need this. And it's always a short-term perspective. But he said they never push back on me. And I thought that was an interesting perspective to pull out for you, that they do expect some tension in that. They don't expect the tension of well, we're going to defend the way that the curriculum has been put together. They do expect the tension of, let me tell you what you're giving up when you do it this way, because that gets them really thinking. Because so often they're so focused on the 2 feet in front of them that they forget 100 yards down the road they really need something different. And that really gets to managing the tension between employer needs and employer wants. Tony mentioned this in terms of K-14. We think about this as lifelong learning for a couple of reasons. One is you got a retiring baby boomer generation, and the evidence that we're seeing so far shows that many of them are, for various reasons, going back to work. Many of them, interestingly, in the over 50 cohort, are going back to work in the healthcare field. And they're looking for flexible options. And so you're seeing things like the American Association of Community Colleges and their Plus 50 initiative, understanding that there is a life after, quote unquote, retirement, and there's a life after 50, and we'd like to tap into education. We're not quite sure how. We're not like your younger generation of 20-somethings, which is why the UW Flexible Learning Program is so brilliant. But thinking about that demographic is going to be important, because the aging demographic isn't going to go away. It's just going to expand. And given the supply-demand projections I showed you didn't just show what was coming out of college. It showed what was available for people that were currently in employment. It even showed a certain level of migrants from other states coming into the population. We're going to have to figure out how to tap the older generation. But in order to tap that older generation to feed the economic engine, we're going to have educational interventions that fit their specific needs. Cost-effective offerings. So thinking about ways that people can build up their education over time. Some states have taken on the strategy of accelerating certain programs, like you can get this degree in 3 years instead of 4, and employers are helping to fund that. And so securing that kind of funding based on employer needs is going to become incredibly important. Right-sizing programs based on employment needs. This, again, all starts with having good supply and demand information and figuring out how to use it. I'm sure all of you watched in the last year some law schools essentially just turning away many applicants and saying, there's no job market. But that was in response to students saying, you let me come to your school and you knew there was no job market. Now I'm going to take you to court. This made the Wall Street Journal. But the bigger point to take away is, is the capacity matched to the demand? And it probably is right now, but have you looked forward that 5 to 10 years to say what's going to need to be ratcheted up and what's going to need to be ratcheted down? And again, that all starts with having good forecasting information. Reality-based employment counseling. So yes, this should start at the younger ages where people can understand, well, if I really want to do this, that's going to involve focusing on math, as opposed to discovering after high school, I want to do this, boy, I really wish I hadn't slept through algebra. Right, so, speaking from personal experience. But at the university level, we are seeing some interesting strategies taken. So Arizona State University has created almost, I don't want this to sound pejorative, but it's like an electronic nannying service. Depending on how you do in certain courses, it predicts the path for you and says, we don't think that you're a good fit for this. We think you should consider this, this, and this. And they've mechanized it and screwed up students, not just their preferences, but their capabilities with the kind of degrees that they would qualify for, in addition to the traditional counseling services. But the counseling services, we would say, again, from the moment you step in the door, have to help you understand the probability of getting a job in various fields. Creating alliances with employers to develop pipelines that start at the middle or high school level. There are a couple of examples here that I think are really interesting. So in Chicago, you may be aware of the alliance that was struck between the high schools, some community colleges and universities, and several employers to encourage at the youngest level and essentially try to control the pipeline of people coming from middle school to high school to college so that they don't fall out of that STEM path. What we know is that people often may start out with an affinity, for instance, in science, technology, engineering, mathematics, but for one reason or another, and it happens an awful lot with females, Around 10, 11, 12, math becomes less cool. They're discouraged and they leave. These alliances with employers are designed in Chicago to help keep people in their traces, so to speak, and encourage them and help them understand how this learning will be applied. And I know that the EW system has many alliances, and again, my answer would be more, and faster to make that education relevant. And again, thinking about that population at a younger and younger age, I can tell you, by the way, employers that aren't getting that kind of cooperation, and I'm seeing this around the world, India is a great example. If you watch what Microsoft and Cisco are doing, they actually intervene in middle school. And they start getting involved in these kids' education in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade in order to ensure that there's a pipeline coming out, because they've made big investments in India. They can't just pull out. And they know that that country is facing a demographic dividend, so they're prepared to really invest. So something to think about. The other is looking at Common Core curriculum. This came up in People too, and the example we provided was in Australia. So in Adelaide, New South Wales, and Queensland, the universities in those 3 areas have worked with mining companies to create a Common Core for 3-year and 4-year students, meaning regardless of where they end up, and if they have to move to different universities, it doesn't matter. They all graduate qualified to do the work at the level that the employer has set. And there's been a lot of push and pull and give and take in that. It's something to think about when we think about these skills clusters, what might be done to try to accelerate flow into the pipeline of those kinds of students so they come out the other side as qualified talent, ready to power the prosperity engine. If you want to think about it this way, 56% of GDP is represented by those 6 industries. That's what's at risk by not solving this problem. And every part of the ecosystem has a role to play. Individuals have to understand their options, and they have to act on them in an adult-to-adult kind of relational way and take responsibility. Educators need to understand what's coming down the pipeline. They need to manage the tensions of that employer, student, government relationship. Government has to really aggressively apply funding to the problem. And employers have got to get better at expressing what they need over a long term and really working hand in hand with employers to make the kind of outcome that they want to have happen. So there's a call to action for everyone. I hope this has been helpful. It's been a privilege to share this with you from a Manpower Group perspective. Where do you have some questions or want to go a little bit deeper?
Any questions? Thank you very much. Rebecca, any questions? I know we're a little bit behind time here, but Jeff?
Rebecca, thank you very much for that provocative presentation. A lot of what you say, I think we've been thinking about, some of which we've acted on. The one aspect of channeling individuals into skill sets or skill clusters that are needed when they come out of the educational process that I wonder about is can you rely on people in middle school or freshman, sophomore, high school and their advisors and parents to make a rational decision at that point? Do they know who they are by that time?
Right.
Most middle schoolers that I know, including my own kids, never really, they weren't really sure who they were.
Right, I'm a painter, I'm a singer, I'm something, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so this is we all like to think that in the presence of data, people would make rational decisions. And if that were the case, there would be a lot of things happening in the world that wouldn't be happening right now. Because individuals do make crazy choices. It's going to have to be not a point in time, but a continuing barrage of information that's age appropriate to help people understand at a young age what they're capable of, starting to help them imagine, to try on. Maryland does a really good job of this, allowing young students to try on different occupations and understand their personal affinities in that moment and what they would need to be focused on if they want to continue on. But it can't just be, 6th grade, we have that conversation and we revisit it in 10th. It has to be a flow. One of the recommendations in B-Bold 2, and I'm not trying to shill for this at all, but I thought it was a really good recommendation, is you have to turn the spigot on and never turn it off. And you've got to allow people to access that information in age-appropriate and relevant ways. Because you're right, they're not going to know in 6th grade. But they know a whole lot less if no one ever told them what their options were. And that's the point of that alliance in Chicago, which is you may end up being a guitar player for the next Aerosmith. However, look at what you're capable of doing. Look at the project that you just worked on. Now you understand that you are more than that. You have these capabilities as well.
Councilor Logan.
Well, I want to thank you for the great presentation. Microphone, please. Hold on. I want to thank you for the great presentation. And I really like the way the end of this is kind of evolving, because I think we really need to hit home what the root of this problem is. On my campus, 48% of the students that come need remedial math. Mm-hmm. Of those 48%, 14% of them will graduate in 6 years. It's a tremendous hurdle for them to get over. 10 years ago, that number was 33%. When I look at the jobs that we can't fill in Wisconsin right now, the three we listed, accounting, mechanical engineer, manufacturing engineer, they all require math. And we need to make sure that unless we can solve the math problem that we have right now in the state, and again, getting back to that lower level, we're never going to be able to fill the skills gap. I spent 2 days this week with Michael Burke from MATC, Mulcair Technical College. They have 230 programs. 88% of their students need remedial math when they get to their campus. If they don't pass remedial math, those 230 programs go down to 11. And so just think about that. So that's really, so whatever we do, I think it's all on all of us. Unless we get students math ready, so when they come to any of our institutions, they can be successful. The options, that's the thing, it doesn't matter what they want to be when they're in junior high, we need to make sure that they're math ready so that when they get older and they figure out what they want to do, they have the ability to do it and not come to our campus and not be able to make it through the programs where the jobs are.
Well said. Thank you for that. I was at a listening session at Blackhawk Technical, and it was really interesting. It was a group of employers and educators, and the conversation started around this math issue and how much time has to be spent on remediation when people come into the technical college system. And what they talked about was really interesting. Where does the problem start? And absolutely, middle school, people may have a tendency to engage or disengage, and a lot of that has to do with, does it seem relevant to them? Does it make them intellectually curious? But someone else pointed out, we don't really think about it a lot, but what counts for math in high school? And do we take that kid through algebra, trigonometry, et cetera, and that's math? Or do we say that the blueprint reading class could count for math? This person illustrated the problem like this. He was an employer, and he was talking about the number of people that can pass the remedial math test when they come to him. And the rep from the technical college was, kind of expressing some empathy. And he said, what I'm testing for isn't actually taught in algebra or trigonometry. It's can you convert the decimal into a percentage, or vice versa? Can you read the ruler? And it was a very interesting, conversation, because I thought to myself, could I do that conversion like that? I mean, how many of us could? How long has it been since we revisited? And he said a simple intervention might be to just, at the high school level, create, and probably in some places this already exists and just would need to be expanded, that kind of math ready for technical application refresher course. So the ideas are out there, and there are a lot of really good pragmatic ideas, and employers and educators are already collaborating on them. But to your point, it's got to be earlier, it's got to be repeated. There has to be exposure so people understand, how those skills can be applied. because we are, and by the way, it is a global phenomenon. We are losing the numbers of STEM skill. Even in countries that are producing them in extraordinary numbers, it's still falling short of the global number that we need. So the U.S., and Wisconsin in particular, has a real opportunity to amp it up and become known as a place where we produce that kind of talent. It still has to be well-rounded talent. It still has to have that liberal arts grounding that's so important for problem-solving and agile thinking skills. But there are some creative ways of addressing it.
One more. Okay, Chancellor Gao. Quickly.
I was so glad you did turn attention to the liberal arts, because it really eludes this analysis. And your comment about being the next guitarist for the next Aerosmith, I'm right there with you. But actually, I'm a musician, and I wish Regent Bartel were here at the moment. I've learned a lot about the work I do now from actually being in rock bands, and I could tell you about that. But how do we account for these mysterious, softer skills? I mean, Professor Carnevale, I thought, at Georgetown, among the many prominent alumni is Bill Clinton. And if you read about his time at Georgetown, he learned a lot of things. They weren't necessarily in the classroom, and they weren't real, job skills. So how are we going to bring that into this analysis? Because I worry that all anybody hears is, well, STEM's all that matters, and the rest of it's a waste of time.
Right, and we've got to manufacture these folks as quickly as possible. So here are some top-of-the-head thoughts, and I've been thinking about it a lot because of this particular client that represents quite a conundrum, which is they're not. So they are facing a huge demographic risk, and they are facing a shortfall around the world. But right now, point in time, they have the butts and seats that they need, if you'll forgive me for being crude. And yet, they're not getting done what they need to get done. And when you ask why, they will tell you, we have problems with innovation, we have problems with teaming, we have problems with collaboration, we have problems with agile thinking. And my response is, that doesn't surprise me. I think if you can trace back that kind of holistic profile that clients want, what's in the job description, incidentally, represents about this much of what they need. That's the table stakes it takes to get to the interview table. To succeed in the role, you need all the skills that you're talking about, the life skills that you pick up in a liberal arts education. I was an English major. Before that, I was a drama major, and before that, I was a misguided chemical engineering major. I learned a lot through that journey, and you can't replace that journey. You're touching people when they're growing up and they're starting to apply all of these life lessons. To make that real to an employer, you have to, again, have the conversation about what you say you want and what you need, and be able to translate. You know what? Marshfield Clinic told us that, and I don't think they mind us sharing the story, they hire history majors, because those history majors have the analytical and curating skills that they need. They could intuitively make that link. Imagine if you could make that link back to employers to say that this breadth of knowledge curriculum teaches these kids this, this, and this that they will absolutely need to have show up in your engineering environment. And that's how you get them to feel comfortable with the well-rounded curriculum and understand the business relevance of it, because you're also creating citizens. Right? You're not just creating robots. So hopefully that answers your question.
Chancellor Wells.
I'll be very quick. I made this recommendation before, and I'll make it again down in Waukesha at the Big Bowl thing.
Yep.
Specifically to the chart, there needs to be an educator sector in the industry thing. And we need to put some custard in our clusters. And the custard is the creative, critical thinking, lifelong learners, innovative problem solvers, and so on. Everyone says it. You just repeat it again.
Yeah.
But it's not in the design to keep the focus of what we have to do to improve the economy here in Wisconsin. So we need some custard in our cluster, and we need an educator sector right alongside all those others.
Yeah, because to your point, Rick, the education, the appetite for education and ongoing development, given all those demographics that I shared with you, and lifelong development and lifelong employment, and the need to be employed for longer is going to require more educators of a terrific stripe. And I love the custard and the clusters. That discussion, that summit series meeting on the 15th, I think, the goal is to take it from what you saw here into that kind of detail, because as we all know, if you just create rules, people will, hit the tick box and they'll comply. And what we really want is the spirit of it, the spirit of creating that well-rounded talent that's going to create entrepreneurialism and innovation. I don't think math classes teach entrepreneurialism and innovation, right? What you're talking about, the custard does that, and so it's critical. So I look forward to that conversation. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Well, thank you, Rebecca, and I want to thank Tony, too. Some really stimulating ideas, a whole bunch of facts that we need to keep in our bonnets as we think about where we go next. And, one of the things I was thinking in this last colloquy was you have the project that AAC&U has done, which demonstrates that most of the really large corporation chiefs in this country recognize what Joe and Rebecca were just talking about in terms of the value of those innovative, problem-solving, creative skills. A lot of the people who do their hiring don't. They get very specific, as Rebecca was saying, about we want exactly this kind of skill and exactly this format or we can't hire you. Part of our job, I think, is to continue that conversation with them about what they really want, what they really need, and infuse in that wider, bigger corporate view that says if people are going to have a pathway up in this society and not just worry about what they'll make when they graduate from whatever educational program it is in the first 2 years, we've got to have a broader view that also, as Chancellor Lovell says, gets more Americans competent in mathematics, which we are not doing at anything nearly at the scope we need to. So there's a number of levers that we need to really be working on as we go forward. Let me just say one or two things here about what some of our work looks like now, because I think very often there are some misapprehensions about this. So, and this will be a snapshot, very quick snapshot of a little bit of data which we will use to follow up on in our next several meetings, as Regent Smith said. But if you look at this slide that's up there now on total degrees awarded, in 10-11, our institutions conferred over 34,000 degrees at all levels, undergraduate and graduate, and that's up from 29,000 just 10 years ago. And that's a 45% increase over the past 30 years. Now, I don't know, I didn't have a chance to ask Tony when he was talking about productivity how he defined that. But I think this is one level of increased productivity that we can be pretty proud of. It's important, I think, to remember that the majority of our graduates start out as Wisconsin residents in the university system, and 81% of those in-state students remain in the state after graduation. Now, that's very broad, very big. It's just counting degrees. The next question people often had is, well, we have the wrong degrees, though. You're producing all these degrees. It's great that you're getting them up there in larger numbers, but they're not in the right areas. Well, we took a look back as of in the fiscal year 2010 year to see what the general areas were and the degrees we produced at the undergraduate level. This is striking to me. I quite frankly didn't expect this to be the case. Look at the huge percentage of them, the farthest by a lot. I think that 4,857 is 18.8% of the total number produced in business and management areas. This is not a case where we're producing, when you look down to the next to last category where Rebecca and I come from, English majors in huge numbers anymore, or foreign language majors in huge numbers anymore. When David Bruchart and I met with the head of the Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce, Kurt Bauer, and we showed him this slide, he was clearly surprised. And it goes to what Rebecca was saying about the communications. Business leaders don't know this, by and large, we find. We've got to figure out better ways to keep making that part of the conversation. Social sciences, the second most, at a little over 8%, and certainly some of the social sciences relate very directly the skills that businesses and corporations need to have in their enterprises. And then you can see all the way down the rest of the line, we clearly need to do better in the engineering category, and we're doing a number of innovations, I think, that you know there to try to get more students there, but we're not there yet, and we're not there yet partly because a number of students who want to go into engineering programs realize they don't have the skills to do it by the time they get to us. Mike Lovell and I, with the other chancellors, are working on this STEM initiative with the water industry in the state and the Business Higher Ed Forum nationally, and that's about building a pipeline starting in elementary school to work eventually in water-related jobs in the state, where we hope to have one of the world-class industries as we build it out in Wisconsin. And that is focused on the first 2 years of college, because what we know is that only about 40% of students who come in as freshmen saying they want to major in a STEM discipline or do actually start in a STEM discipline are in a STEM discipline by the time they get to be juniors. So in the first 2 years of college, we lose 60% of our students who come in saying they want to be STEM majors. And we don't have nearly enough of them even coming in wanting to be STEM majors because they don't have the math skills to even contemplate that when they come out of the schools. So interesting set of data there, too. If we look at this next slide in terms of degree trends, it is worth noting that the number of degrees in STEM areas has grown by about 46% over the past 10 years. In the same period, degrees in health-related fields are up by 39%. Growth is good. The absolute numbers are not high enough, however. If you look down in some of the other examples of specific degrees there that have been added in high-demand fields, supply chain management at Stout, a joint program in health and wellness management at the institution you see there, a new BBA in entrepreneurship at UW-Whitewater. You will see more as you look back at the degree programs we're adding in recent years, more and more that are indeed intended to respond directly to workforce needs in the state. So again, this is a very quick snapshot of some of the things that have been going on recently. We'll take these issues and many more up in more depth in the next few meetings, where we'll continue to look generally at this topic. So with that, I want to turn it back over to President Smith.
Thank you, Kevin. That's good. We have the really good discussion we've had this morning on this. As I mentioned earlier, the many aspects of economic development will continue to pop up on our agendas in the coming months. To help us understand how the UW system might incorporate these themes into its communications efforts, we'd like to invite Dave Giroux, who heads up our systems communications and external relations team, to share some information about a new strategic communications plan. Kevin, would you like to set that up?
Sure. Based on the conversation today and our many discussions about the core mission of developing educated citizens grounded in the liberal arts and sciences and the relation of workforce and economic development to that mission, I think it's clear that we need to explain ourselves in a way that reflects both how we think about ourselves, but also how others see us. And that communication does have to change with the times. We no longer think about the UW system as one monolithic entity. It's an effective, efficient, increasingly flexible family of distinctive public colleges, universities, and statewide outreach networks. At the system, we've been thinking carefully about the way we try to shape our short-term communications around the themes that we're discussing this morning and our long-term system brand. In the near term, I think we need to illustrate in a more compelling, more consistent manner that our colleges, universities, and extension networks are a key ingredient in the state's economic recovery and its long-term vitality. But it's really much broader than that. The recovery we seek is not just about jobs and sales receipts and tax revenues. It is about those things, but it's also about making people feel strong and safe and confident and proud, feelings that tend to drive those other indicators in the direction we want to have them driven. We at the UW can be a big part of creating and renewing that feeling of strength, but only if the leaders of the state see the UW as a smart place to invest some scarce dollars for long-term return on that investment. As I think we all know, the growth agenda for Wisconsin has focused a great deal of attention on the pressing need for more well-prepared college graduates. In today's climate, we want to think about this, all of this, as part of a larger effort to help Wisconsin people feel more secure and confident about their futures. We're also focused on stronger businesses, helping local industries and emerging businesses translate innovation into long-term success, transforming ideas into jobs, and shoring up Wisconsin's competitive edge. So here to tell us a little more about how we're thinking of articulating what I'll call our value proposition in this context is Dave. And we, let me say, really want and need the board's advice on this communications framework as we shape it up. We hope is a very effective advocacy plan for the 13-15 state budget that you approved at the August Regent meeting. So with that, Dave.
Thank you, President Riley. And Secretary Radu just texted me telling me we're a little bit behind schedule to move things along, so I'll try and abide by your request, Jane. And we are using every bit of technology we have available to us, including our cell phones this morning. We're doing a lot of important things to help stimulate Wisconsin's economic prosperity. Are we communicating that well? Are we making that message come across loud and clear? Do we have the right message? Are we using the right megaphone? And one of the things that we've tried to do in a different way this time around is to take a real collaborative approach. That is to say, we've involved communicators, faculty members, Chancellor Gow, Provost Lampe have worked on this project with me directly from all across the system to help answer the question that President Riley just posed. Can we explain ourselves a little bit better, a little bit more compellingly in this arena? Well, in public relations, I believe that my job is not only to help explain the university to the world, but help explain the world to the university. So we begin this effort by listening to what our public is telling us. And we conducted a survey in March of this year involving about 450 residents from across the state, distributed by geography, by gender, by race and ethnicity, by education levels, in ways that generally match our state population. What we found is that Wisconsin residents are really supportive of things that are local. The highest response when we ask people, what's an important use of taxpayer dollars, comes with respect to things like K-12 schools, roads, police, public safety, things that they see close to them, things that offer universal benefit, things that are tangible. Now, I should mention that higher education in general, both the Wisconsin technical colleges and the UW system, receive pretty strong support, about 73%, and about 80% of people report feeling a sense of pride, a feeling of pride, not just an expression of support, but personal pride about the quality of education that one can gain at a UW campus or a WTCS school. Now, in those data, we also touched on some various issues of importance, and access and affordability rose to the top. I'll touch on that one in just a moment. And most Wisconsin residents today do believe, as we've heard from Rebecca and Tony this morning, that a college degree of some kind is more important than ever before. So let's drill down into a little bit more about what we heard from our public. The best use of taxpayer funds. When we ask people within the university's context, what are the best uses of taxpayer funds? We found some interesting results. As I mentioned, access and affordability rose to the top. We've provided these answers in randomized order, and despite that randomization, two things together floated to the top. Keeping tuition low for Wisconsin residents, 82% said this is a good use of taxpayer dollars. Providing financial aid came in just under that at 73%. Now, below that level is where we start to see some of the issues split apart a little bit. And by that, I'll point to the third ranked one. 71% of the people said that maintaining our current facilities was a good use of taxpayer funds. Only 46% said building new buildings to support growth was a good use of taxpayer funds. Keeping the best professors in the classroom, and I'm looking at our faculty representatives here when I say this, 65% said that is a good use of an important use of taxpayer funds. Recruiting new professors, 54%. Now remember, this survey was conducted in March of this year at a time when the state of the economy is very much on people's minds. I think what we're seeing and reflected in these answers, and that splitting apart of new and old, is a bit of the kitchen table conversation that's likely still happening around the state today, and that is, do we fix the roof, or do we build on that new family room we've been wanting?
Well, maybe today we just fix the roof, keep the furnace running, and not be too ambitious with the way we spend our family dollars. So when we ask people how the university spends its dollars, I think we see that mindset that is, hold on to what you've got, keep it working well, invest wisely in things that allow you to do what you do best, which is to educate Wisconsin residents. And with that in mind, I'll look at a different question, which is what benefits do people perceive to be more important than others within the university's line of work? What mission of ours do they find most salient? 3 things, again, random order, rose to the top, all together, all by themselves. Helping people achieve their life goals, providing continuing education for adults, something, again, we've talked a lot about lately with the flexible degree, and educating Wisconsin residents as opposed to non-state residents. Statistically, those three responses tied for first place. What's more interesting to me, because I think anytime you ask people about college, those kinds of answers are going to be the most salient to people, is what came in second and third. Really, again, remember the top 3 are tied. Stimulating job growth in local communities. 61% said this is an important benefit. Attracting new industries to Wisconsin. 52% said that is an important benefit. What's really fun is when you take these same answers and ask people, of the benefits we provide, where can we do better? And look at that. Where do people want us to focus our energies on improvement? And a lot of people say we can do better on the core educational teaching mission, but look at the strong response to stimulating job growth and attracting new industries. That is where people want to see us moving the needle, as it were. So this is where we try to take some of our work. Now, in addition to this quantitative research, we also involved a faculty member here from UW-Madison, Professor Kathy Kramer-Walsh, a really interesting person with a really interesting way of going about her research. She traveled around the state to 27 different communities over a period of about 5 years, from 2007 to 2012. And she quite literally just would go to gas stations and coffee shops, diners and taverns, and just start up a conversation with people. Who are you? My name's Kathy Walsh. I'm from UW-Madison. I'd like to know what you're thinking about. And it really was focused on UW-Madison, but a lot of the findings that she discovered are in many ways generalizable to all of our institutions. And that is, people found, or she found, a pervasive sense of distance from the UW that was not isolated. It was part of a larger sense of disconnection from large institutions, institutions over which people feel like they have very little control, institutions of authority. Now, in those conversations, when she said, what do you think is most important? What can we do better? Before ever offering, what we think the university can do better, jobs kept coming back. We want you to help create jobs in our community. And Kathy also observed that responding to these kinds of issues requires more of what her research actually did and involved, which is listening to people. Now, later this morning, we're going to hear from our Cooperative Extension colleagues, and I wish they were here to hear me say this, because I deserve some credit. But one of the things that Professor Walsh found was a great sense of respect and trust for those local extension educators, because they are in the community. They're not perceived as faculty members from the university, although most of them are. They're perceived as members of the community, as people who share our concerns and values, and they were people that in contrast to our campus-based staff and faculty, were really kind of rose out again without a lot of prompting. Who is it that you turn to? Who is it that you trust in the university? People said, my local extension agent, my local extension educator. So with that insight, again, we've listened, we've tried to explain the public's voice to the university. We've tried to develop a brand platform, a strategic communication framework that will help us talk and speak more consistently, more clearly about the issues that we think matter to people. And the issues are clear: jobs, economy, economic development, helping people, as President Riley said, feel strong again. Our brand platform is built on the following principles. We're talking to people who care deeply about their local community. They want to see that connection in tangible, clear terms. They want to know that UW is bringing economic strength to their community and their neighbors now. It's got to be immediate, it's got to be action-oriented, and we've got to demonstrate that we are the things that are working. We are the furnace and the roof on the house. We are the part of the house that deserves and needs continued maintenance and investment. And we've got to demonstrate that with compelling facts, impacts, outcomes, not just outputs, but outcomes. And we've got to make people feel proud, again, even more than they already do, about what we're doing and the experience that they, their children, their grandchildren are having as members of the University of Wisconsin community. So the idea here, again, is to give all the chancellors and their colleagues across the institutions a bigger megaphone, and as frightening as it may be to give Rick Wells a bigger megaphone, I'm ready to go there. And I say that because I'm going to call out Rick. You're picking on again. I'm not picking on him because I want to point out right now, before I go any further, that, again, this has been a collaborative effort. But as of late, I want to say the integrated marketing team at UW-Oshkosh has been doing yeoman's work for us, and I really appreciate that, Rick. So with that, our message, our brand platform is built around knowledge powers Wisconsin. Knowledge powers Wisconsin. What do we mean by that? We mean that this is a modular approach that can be adapted anywhere to almost any issue. Knowledge powers Wisconsin, fill in the blank. Knowledge powers Wisconsin's workforce. Knowledge powers Wisconsin manufacturing. Knowledge powers Wisconsin farming. Knowledge powers Wisconsin's art and culture. Knowledge powers Wisconsin's public health. You can adapt this message, customize it in almost any way you can, in almost any way you want to. We want to make this universally adaptable, so that it's equally adaptable to UW-Whitewater, UW-Parkside, UW-Madison, River Falls, Milwaukee. Whatever your theme, whatever your local message is, whatever your colors are, they will blend in with this message seamlessly. We want to use our own existing media channels. We're not talking about an ad campaign. I want to make that clear. I'm going to show you some things that look like advertisements, but there are things we're going to use in our own channels. Our own alumni magazines, our own campus newsletters, our own websites. Now, that's not to say that we won't find an opportunity for some paid placement where we have maybe a private donor who's willing to help subsidize that or partner with us in some way. But for the most part, we're talking about earned and owned media and using those opportunities, again, more consistently to articulate our message about the relationship between the strength of our university and the strength of our Wisconsin economy. Knowledge powers Wisconsin farming. And I wish Regent Tyler were here today because I showed him an earlier version of this in which we had a European tractor there. And I want to thank the people at Case New Holland for giving us a really awesome looking fire-breathing American-made tractor to use in this message. So there's knowledge powers Wisconsin farming. Substitute any image you want in the state of Wisconsin that represents agriculture. Put in a different kind of farm implement there. We can make the connection between the strength of our university, what we're doing in genetics and food science, both the front-end production, the back-end value-added. We can make that connection more clear, more salient, not only for people in the agricultural community, but people who care deeply about that sector of our economy. Knowledge powers Wisconsin manufacturing. That is an honest-to-goodness Pierce fire engine manufactured by Oshkosh Truck. Now, I should have noted on the agriculture one, we had adapted that for use by UW-Platteville. So you notice the UW-Platteville logo and the colors from their color scheme were incorporated. Here you see UW-Oshkosh. And you can't read the copy there, and I won't take too much time, but I want to read this because I think it's pretty compelling. Wisconsin is a manufacturing powerhouse. Our public universities fuel that success with more than $50 million in manufacturing research, education, and outreach every year. From supply chain management and e-business to transportation logistics and paper science. UW campuses are strong business partners. Today, we are strengthening Wisconsin's position in advanced manufacturing. Knowledge powers Wisconsin's workforce. And Chancellor Chelfer, I really hope you like that splash of purple. We did that just for you, and I noticed you got your purple tie on today. Thank you for that. Knowledge powers Wisconsin's workforce. Again, a universally adaptable ad that shows not only the face of our graduates, but the text, again, talks about their skills as problem solvers, communicators, team players, the kinds of things we've heard talked about today with Tony and Rebecca. And the centerpiece of this is what I would call a microsite or a story hub. It's a new website that we've launched, and if the technology works, and believe me, we've been pushing the limits today, we'll go right to today's technology. And please work. Oh. Any advice, Chris? There we go. And the top story on our website right now is Regents Discuss Workforce Challenges. News from 5 minutes ago. Posted fresh on our uwpowerswisconsin.com website. And on this website you'll find stories from every institution that relate to stronger businesses, stronger communities, and a stronger workforce. And I believe this provides the framework, as Kevin was alluding to. How do I get out of here, Chris? I believe this provides the framework for a new strategic vision for the UW system. This is maybe a new spin on the growth agenda, maybe a new way of articulating what we do that more accurately reflects all that we do. It's not just about more graduates. It's about more graduates, broad affordable access, innovative new models like the flexible degree, all of which contribute to a stronger workforce. It's not just about more jobs. It's about the business outreach we do to manufacturing, agriculture, plastics, you name it, water technology, freshwater sciences, in ways that create a stronger business climate in Wisconsin. We help fuel that strength. And it's about stronger communities. It's about the campus-based and extension networks, outreach programs that strengthen our quality of life in Wisconsin in ways that make it more welcoming to businesses and workers alike. So I believe this message can go beyond just the press releases, the editorials, the owned media. I think this is a way for us to articulate next month when we look at the economic development strategic plan that Dave Bruckhardt is putting together. I think we think about it in this light. It's not just about the university doing something for the university's sake. It's about doing it so that we help Wisconsinites feel stronger, more empowered, more confident in our economic future and our quality of life for our children and grandchildren. So that's our message. We're sticking to it.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dave. Regent Smith, maybe we can take a few minutes for that input from the board that we very much want to have. Let me preface that by saying I want to thank Dave and all the people from around the UW system who worked on this advocacy strategic plan. And, you know, those of us in the university, I think, have a tendency to go out around the state and say, let us tell you what we can do for you. We don't often enough go out and do what we've done here in the survey and Professor Walsh's work and say, tell us what you want us to do for you. And that's what we've done to form the basis of the kind of advocacy that you have seen we want to undertake, and now we need to hear from you whether you think that's the right kind of advocacy. Regent Drew.
Like Regent Tyler, good job on the case track.
I thought you might like that one.
Okay, I'm glad you caught that.
Stock imagery has its risks.
My question is, what's your experience with, has been so far with social media, and what plans you have for social media? I never go to a website. I get everything off my Facebook feed.
No, that is a great question, Regent Drew. Thank you for that. And I meant to touch on this, but per Jane's admonition, I was trying to speed things along. Thank you for bringing me back to what really matters most, Facebook. But no, social media is becoming an increasingly important channel for our institutions. Obviously, we have a student body, as Regent Pointer would attest to, that is very, very strongly engaged on social media. Both Twitter, Facebook, Pinterest is rapidly growing, lots of other channels, YouTube, you name it. That is a way for us to not only put out our message, but the beauty of social media is that it is social. We are live tweeting this meeting as we speak. Thank you, Amanda. And we are engaging in that conversation, hopefully, and we're trying to do this better in a two-way fashion where people are actually commenting about what you all are saying right now in live space. It's like there's a word cloud going on over this meeting that unless you're watching that Twitter conversation, you may not even be aware of. but we have some campuses that are doing wonderful things on social media. Chancellor Hardin's group has some crazy things going on up at UW Green Bay, and you know, it's a really powerful footprint on social media that outsizes their campus in the higher education landscape. UW Madison, obviously very strong. We're trying to grow our UW system footprint, and we've established a special platform for UW Powers Wisconsin. And we've got some other really creative ideas, ways that we really want to engage our students, our alumni, our faculty and staff, have them be part of this conversation in ways that talk about how UW not only powers Wisconsin, but on a personal level, let's really get this down to brass tacks. How does UW power me? How am I, as a student, putting my knowledge to work already? What experiences am I having that really make me feel optimistic about my potential? What am I doing as an alumni or an alumnus that puts my knowledge to work? So think about the people that we've honored as alums from our various institutions. What could they say in social media space on our behalf about how UW prepared them not only for career success, but personal growth and development? I think that's the promise that we have with social media, and to repurpose a lot of really good content that not only we produce, but is told about us in the mass media, and we can, again, build that conversational platform, that truly social media.
Regent Whitburn.
I commend you. I think you've got a very strong message, grounded obviously in appropriate research, and you have spent time in thinking about the input that you received in this information and data, which you of course received in March, reaching out, talking to a variety of people here and elsewhere. And to the extent that we work with your colleagues across the campuses to communicate a consistent, understandable bottom line with regard to the massive upsides to the things that are happening, it's timely and incredibly important. So I'm delighted to congratulate you for your work in this important.
Thank you, Regent Whitburn. That means a lot, and I really want to make sure that who are watching on streaming video heard that, because for many reasons.
Yes.
But many of them deserve the credit, is what I was meaning to say, and that is, again, not only the folks at UW Oshkosh, but the marketing team at UW Whitewater. Folks have been pouring content into that website. Go to uwpowerswi.com, and you will find an amazing array of success stories, not produced by me and my team, but gathered by me and my team with the help of a lot of really good communicators and really skilled faculty and staff around the system, and they really deserve the credit. But thank you.
Regent Milner.
My congratulations. It's
Thank
a good concept, well-based in data, and I particularly I appreciate that you're moving beyond that sort of general concept of higher education to actually how higher education improves the lives of people in Wisconsin, the job growth, the business growth. It makes it more tangible to people who live throughout the state. It's not really a suggestion, perhaps it's a question. One of the strengths of the system is the cooperation and interactivity between the institutions, between the various campuses. Are there any particular areas where you had particular sites that were branded with the different college universities? Are there any opportunities where you could do some co-branding?
Yes, absolutely. I won't mess with the technology now because I know it won't work when I need it to. No offense, Chris. But in fact, if you go to uwpowerswisconsin.com and you look at some of the stories, we have at least a few of them that showcase, for example, the collaborative health and wellness degree that President Riley mentioned very briefly earlier. It's a new responsive program that addresses an emerging workforce need that is the product of a collaboration between at least 4 or 5 of our institutions, including UW Extension. So it's a way of showing not only that we have collaboration among the institutions sort of bilaterally, but the value of a system that shows that we can efficiently pool our resources to respond rapidly to an emerging need in ways that might be very difficult for any one institution to do by itself. And we'll take your advice and find ways to really amplify that collaborative nature. We're tagging all those stories in various categories, and we know that we're going to find new, different, and better ways to leverage that content once the site is really more fully populated. And I don't think we have a collaboration tag, but we will by 5 o'clock tonight.
But that's very good to hear, because one of the strengths of the system, you're doing a branding for the system,
yes,
as well as for the various institutions that make up the system. And one of the strengths is understanding how that system makes the parts stronger than, the whole is stronger than the individual parts.
Certainly is. And again, I want to emphasize we're being very careful to allow the institutions to preserve their own distinctive brand identities. And in doing so, I think we're shaping the brand identity for the system itself, which is to say we need to be clear and honest about the value of the system, but at the same time find that space for those strong institutional brands to shine through. And we can be that megaphone, that magnifying glass that amplifies that local perceived value and that strong affinity that people feel as alums, as donors, as students and parents.
So what happens next, and what do you need to implement?
What happens next is hopefully this becomes the toolkit for our chancellors, their colleagues, their staff, as they go forward and communicate, again, through all their existing channels, be it Chancellor Ford speaking to the local Rotary Club, or Chancellor Telfer publishing an article in his alumni magazine. We want to give them the templates, the materials to speak and sing from the same hymnal, as it were. But they don't all have to sing the same tune exactly. They can talk about knowledge powering Wisconsin's workforce in at least 15 different ways. And they can put their own spin on it, their own flavor, their own graphics, their own logos, their own colors. A little purple for Whitewater or Stevens Point, a little splash of orange for Platteville. And we want to allow that space, and of course that customization goes beyond the color scheme. It goes to the words and the substance and the actions. What we need, I think, most of all, is the continued collaboration from my colleagues across the system, and I'm confident we're getting it. Having started as a public relations practitioner in one of the institutions, I can tell you, in all honesty, I've never seen this level of enthusiasm among our group, and I'm excited about where we're going with this.
Well, thank you, Regents, for those good remarks and reactions. Keep them coming as you see are working with our colleagues to roll this advocacy plan out. And when I listen to Dave do this, for those of you who've seen him on Wisconsin Public Television, I always wait for him to get to the ask for money. But he doesn't have to do that today, so that's very good.
It doesn't take him long on TV.
No, it doesn't.
Now we return you to your regularly scheduled program.
Pass it back to your regularly scheduled Region President. All right, Smith.
We're going to talk a little bit about the UW colleges and UW Extension. Ray and Rick, are they going to come up at the panel table? Okay. Okay, Kevin's going to do that. I'm sorry. We'll start out with a little background on the, as you may have heard, the Cooperative Extension has been in celebration mode for much of the past year, and that's because the Cooperative Extension, a division of UW Extension, is celebrating 100 years of service going back to 1912, when its first educator, Ernest Leonard Luther, was hired.
There he is now.
There he is now. He just walked in. That's quite a hit. Since then, the reach and impact of cooperative extension has boomed. I don't know how many of you know that Wisconsin residents benefit from more than 1.3 million educational contacts each year through cooperative extensions programs. That includes more than 500,000 related to agriculture and business, 497,000 related to families, and 346,000 involving youth in all 72 counties in Wisconsin. Before we proceed with our visitors today, I I'd like to have Kevin say a few words.
Oh, very quickly, just as a former chancellor of UW Extension, it's my pleasure to congratulate you both and everybody in Cooperative Extension in particular on the 100th anniversary of your work. This is a really great partnership among the federal government, county governments, the university, and the people of Wisconsin putting knowledge to work. And it's an institution, a function, and then an institution that has served this state extremely well, I think, for 100 years, and I hope will for the next 100 years. So with that, I want to turn it back to our Oneida County agent and the Dean of Cooperative Extension.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for being here today, and welcome to our celebration of our Centennial. Mr. Luther,
Mr. Fleming.
May I refer to you as E.L.?
No, you may not.
In all due respect, Mr. Luther, and not Ernest either, right?
That's correct.
So I heard you were our first extension educator, and I heard it was pretty far north. So, 1912 is a long time ago, and I wondered how you got around during the winter, and how did you reach people?
Well, it took me a while to get here this morning from Rhinelander on this old I had 3 flats, and the roads are much better today. Back then, it was I always had flats. I hope you guys... They gave me an old Model T after that. Remember Model T?
I do not. No, I do not. No.
Model Ts had 2 speeds forward and pedals and 1 backwards. Little tiny skinny tires. They were very good in the snow, especially with chains.
Yes.
But roads in those days were horrible, and so always fixing flats. So I'm an expert at fixing flats. But we also during the Depression, in that era, actually into the 20s, a railroad car, converted it into a classroom, and had a small lab in that railroad car. And we actually moved that railroad car around the state and held sessions for people in communities and set up the railroad car. It's pretty slick.
Yeah, sounds like it. Today we have faculty in every county in the state, and you were sort of isolated, I imagine, in 1912. And so how did you know what the local needs were? How did you really gain a sense of what you needed to provide educational programming for it? How did you do that?
Well, we got to know just about everybody in the county, all 3 of them. Some counties had more cows than people, and some of them were smarter. So it was an interesting thing. We had a lot of potato issues. We had a lot of forestry issues, things that we were able to help guide farmers along. And of course, that was a period where there was no electricity, and snow was a whole lot deeper back then than it is today. That's what people tell me.
That's right here. Yeah. I think you had dealt with all kinds of issues, and obviously you were working with farmers. That's where the demand came from early on, as people were trying to eke out a living in agriculture in Oneida County in the north. You probably helped farm families too, though, didn't you, in your work?
Oh, certainly. In fact, we helped the whole family. Some of the things we did, helping families figure out how to can and how to store food was important. Those kinds of things, and we still build on that principle after the Depression and long after I retired. We were still helping families, not just farmers.
Yeah, I think what was interesting in the history, I remember reading about this in the book that you all have by Jerry Apps, was the notion of our role in the whole notion of rural electrification. And that was a brand new technology to most of Wisconsin at the time. Can you describe how you worked in that area?
Well, before rural electrification in the mid-30s, I was teaching farmers how to effectively milk cows by hand. That's a real complicated thing, as you can imagine. Most of you haven't milk cows, I can tell.
I did as I grew up, so yes.
It was by hand. And in the rural power company, or the power companies, they weren't necessarily rural at the time, really had no interest in providing farmers or rural people with electricity, because they really only envisioned that if they would use it as light their homes or to on a fan or something. They never envisioned the impact it would have on farmers, from milking machines to bulk tanks to all kinds of other things. Had no idea. So when the Rural Electrification Act passed, and that started happening, we were a part of helping to design those systems, helping to lay them out, find ways to help farmers figure out how to effectively wire and connect to the grid. It was pretty amazing, and the impact it had on the economic level of rural Wisconsin was enormous, and the differential between urban areas and rural areas just shrunk enormously, principally because of what Extension had done in partnership with the Rural Electrification Association.
You know, that strikes me as being very familiar with a technology advance we have today, the concept of broadband access. In many ways, our educators in the counties are working with providers, with communities, with people, businesses, to figure out how to take something that might be seen largely maybe as recreational when they first got it, in terms of internet access, and turning it into an economic development tool. So it's very interesting that this parallels the notion of introduction of electricity, and here we are in the year 2012, not 1912, in 2012, actually engaging people in how to develop economically out of increased access to broadband technology. In fact, we have a new center that just got established, which embodies, I think, the notion of how we can add value to the state, to the counties, to the communities, to the people, to the businesses, called the Center for Community Technology Solutions. Engaging local partners, engaging institutions, schools, businesses to better use technology. So I'm kind of interested in how you partnered at the time. Did you partner with local co-ops? Did you partner with other providers in terms of expanding the use of electricity and making it more than just a convenience?
Internet.
Yeah. Internet, the notion of being able to use electricity in a way to convert it into signals that we can actually transmit information. I know, transmit information even about wires now. So that
fancy words do not impress me.
A man of your stature of being grassroots oriented and being very practically oriented, I'd understand that. So the point was, in this work now, is at the time, electricity. The use of words that describe electricity might have been fancy words. So how did you had to translate some of this, right? People hadn't seen this before, and what was the role that you played in doing that?
Well, we brought families together and conducted education and little sessions, and we did things with county government. We connected them physically so that they could share different ideas and learn together. It was also important that they made us aware of their problems. Felt like we were part of the community and we lived in that community, so their problems were our problems. What are you doing today?
I think we could translate that into today's culture as well. In fact, the matter is that we are engaging learners around broadband access in community centers, in schools, in employment centers, in businesses, in ways that they can also take advantage of this technology. And now we're beginning to expand that into actual on-the-ground, in-the-field applications where we have iPads and other tablets working with crop consultants, working with farmers, working with providers of community services, beginning to work with county governments about how that all can be used. Some county governments today are all actually providing their county board supervisors with tablets, mostly iPads, so that they can be engaged in using those as part of their business of running county government as well.
What do lily pads have to do with
it? People in county government, too, tend to jump from one to the other. Okay. Only in county government, of course. And I think the notion is that being able to help our youth be able to use these new technologies, much like farmers had to learn how to use new technologies to increase productivity in their dairy farms. Now we have youth who may be using technology to learn more about potential careers that they may have in the future in terms of building a stronger workforce development to build gaps that employers have now in terms of the sciences, that if we can keep youth engaged in those, perhaps they will follow pathways that will help grow the economics of this state. Partnering with our campuses all over the state, both the 2-year colleges and the 4-year campuses, to enable a stronger workforce in Wisconsin. I don't think that's a lot different, really, but what you were doing in the early part of the 20th century in terms of empowering, engaging, and enabling farmers to be better at their businesses.
No, it probably wasn't, but you know what? My Indian motorcycle is illegally parked. I can get on the road, and we're probably boring these folks in here.
Yes, and I thank you very much. Didn't you get an S sticker that you could have used? No, you didn't.
What's an S sticker?
Yeah, no, that's another story altogether. At any rate, I want to thank you, Mr. Luther, for all the work you did in helping to pioneer the beginning of cooperative extension, which is part of UW Extension, part of the UW system in Wisconsin. We owe you a great debt of gratitude for what you have done to help position us to be what we are in communities throughout Wisconsin today.
I appreciate that very much. You know, I see the name on this building is Van Heist. He was a good friend of mine.
That's right.
Well, when will my name be on one of these?
We'll have to settle for the cutout that we have here. By the way, I should tell you, this is going to go back to Oneida County itself, and in honor of that county's decision to fund the first educator in extension in Wisconsin. So again, sir, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you.
And have a safe trip back.
So, Mr. Luther, before you leave, could you pull that cutout photo over into the middle of the room here in front of the screen? I wanted to point something out about it. Very good. Thank you. You'll notice, for those of you who can see, if you take a look below the crossbar, that EL has installed a 2-cylinder engine on his bicycle. And this was the way he got around in a pretty big county to his experimental plots and to his clients in the agriculture business at the time. And I always like to say, with all the conversation we're having now about educational technology and how we use the explosion of all this sophisticated information technology that EL and the Dean were talking about to make our education more efficient and effective, that 2-cylinder engine was the first piece of information educational technology in the state of Wisconsin, after chalk. So thank you.
By the way, these restored are now worth about $50,000.
Wow.
That's a request in our budget.
Very good. We knew there was a point to this. Thank you, Rick, and thank you, Regent Pruitt.
I just wanted to compliment this in the aftermath of Clint Eastwood and his chair. This was a completely different direction. Well done. Very well done.
Thank you both. I think we'll now recess for box lunch. Comes back a little bit before 1.